Hi, Al. G'day, Ben.
G'day, Dom. How are you? G'day, everyone.
Yeah, good. How's the little one going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yep, sleeping, which is good.
So if we hear crying in the background, then we know she's no longer sleeping.
Well, if I can hear her from here, then we're in trouble.
Hi, Mark, Susan, and Jake. Not sure if you've ever joined before.
No, I haven't. So how are you going?
Yeah, good. Yourself?
Good, thank you.
So we normally wait another couple minutes for, whoever else is joining or in their utes and trying to join, and then we'll kick it off. Did you get some rain your way, Ben?
Yeah, yep, we have. We've probably got about an inch over the last week, which is good. So that's set us up quite nicely. We'll start seeding next week, which will be good. So that should all come up when it gets put in, which will be rare.
Yeah, very nice. I was going to say, David's, actual equipment probably only works if there is moisture in the soil. So probably need to work on that on some parts, get some moisture in first. Hi, Laura. How you going?
Good, thanks, Dom. How are you?
Yeah, good.
It's good.
All right, I'll give it another minute or so and then we'll kick off. All right, I might kick it off and then I'm sure people will stumble in as we go. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and especially to our two guest speakers, David from Moisture Plant Technology and Chris from Pinion Advisory. If this is the first Farmers Yarn session you're joining, on behalf of SPA and 3EC Consulting, I'd like to welcome you to the call. Each of these sessions bring together farmers, ag tech companies and industry experts to chat about everything from precision agriculture and automation to cybersecurity and agri-science. Due to the unpredictable, and I think it's probably fair to say unprecedented times we're currently in, we've also decided to include a discussion on commodity markets to this month's call, which will be Chris's presentation. As I've said previously, if there's a topic you'd like covered or a speaker you'd like to hear from, please let us know and we'll do our best to line them up in the future sessions. Most importantly, if you have a question for our speakers today, please jump in and ask. In saying this, and for the benefits of the speakers in the call, we'll continue a trend from last year's meetups. If you hear silence from the audience, then we count this as approval. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David, who runs a mechanical engineering consultancy, which is specialising in design of plants and equipment for heavy industries like mining and agriculture. In 2018, he founded Moisture Plant Technology, where he spent the past 8 years developing a semi-autonomous seeding system that responds to variabilities in soil moisture in real time. David also runs a mixed farming operation near Tullamore in central New South Wales. So with that, I'll handball it to you, Dave, if you want to share your screen and kick off your presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dom. Is this working?
Perfect. You can see it.
Right. So probably some bits of the background to what we're working on here is determining the ideal seeding depth for planting our crop. Now, in Australia, our cropping program is very much reliant on the basis of a summer rainfall event that builds up a moisture profile in the soil, and we plant seeds ideally into that moisture profile to get emergence, and then obviously they grow through winter. But weather events are probably making that rainfall events less reliable, and other variabilities such as soil makes it very difficult to, in some cases, to get that seeding depth optimized. Now, if we don't get it right, we end up with a case where we have uneven crop emergence, where some of the crop emerged based on the stored moisture, whereas other areas either didn't grow at all or grew sometime later after a rainfall event. This obviously results in reduced yields and can pose other risks such as weeds and other sort of things going on through the season. Now, if we look at a lot of the conventional seeding equipment, especially stuff that comes from Canada or North America, it's very much built on the basis of a fixed or set or precision seeding depth. And while that is obviously a good basis, it doesn't really take into account any variability within the soil. So Australian soils are not uniform, and we've got incredibly old and incredibly variable soils. So compounding that with variable weather events aspect to and other sort of factors can mean that the ideal seed placement position on one end of the field can be dramatically different to what it is at the other end. So yeah, we kicked off this project some time ago based on the principle of using an in-furrow soil moisture sensor to map the soil property while we were seeding the crop. So we knew exactly what was going on at every location across the field, rather than just static locations where we've scratched around with a shovel or otherwise. Now, while that was a great idea, I suppose, it obviously created a constraint where if we knew that there was no moisture at a particular area, we needed some sort of tool to be able to react to that. So we started working on building our own row unit that could adjust seeding depth on the fly as we traversed the field. We had a number of prototypes, each one scaling up as we learned more and more information about how the machine worked. And then in 2023, we built our first full-scale 12-metre 36-row machine, which is currently operational. So the way the rig works is we've got our row units which are hydraulically activated but electronically controlled. We have 6 moisture sensors running across the machine. And then we've got the Isobus data control system at the front of it that is controlling the various depth settings, pressures, etc. Now, our row unit is a little bit unique. It's what we found, or what we sort of knew, I suppose, was that as we changed seeding depth, we needed to maintain a constant packing pressure behind the tine. So as we go deeper, we need to often reduce the press wheel pressure. And depending on the soil type, we need to increase the gauge wheel pressure. So our row unit allows us to have independent control of each of those 3 functions. That is the gauge wheel pressure, the tine depth, and the press wheel. And we can control each of those 3 functions through the ISO screen. So this is how the row units are sort of working. Primarily, this is just showing us adjusting the tines from the cab, but realistically, we are also controlling the pressure in the gauge wheel and the tine, the gauge wheel and the press wheel circuits as this is going. So the machine is running off an ISO screen, So we can not only use the infrared soil moisture sensors for what's going on in real time, but we can also import shape files if we know there are variabilities within the soil. If we know we've got a lighter soil to heavy soil, we can pre-program some of those gauge wheel, press wheel pressures before we start. Furthermore, we can export the as seeded shape file. So at some later date, we might want to, let's say at harvest, we want to understand why we may have got a better yield in one location to another. We can not only correlate that back to soil data, but we can also correlate that back to the seed placement data. Also within this, we can tie this back to our seed cart. So we may want to increase or decrease a seeding rate based on depth. We may want to increase or decrease a FERT or other injection based off properties that are going on within the mechanics of the machine. So like I said, we've got our first commercial machines that have now up and running and operational. And I suppose we're coming to the back end of sort of ironing out all the bugs there, and we're probably ready to take this or move it towards a commercialization pathway. And our pathway is not so much to be building seeders ourselves. There's a zillion seeding manufacturers already within the country, and I think our ideal solution or pathway to market is to allow those OEMs to retrofit or embed this technology into their standard platform. So yeah, I've put a QR code there. I'd probably love some feedback from you guys on some basic sort of machine sort of stuff, and any other feedback that you think might be valuable for where we are and where we're going. And that's sort of it for me, Dom.
Perfect. Thanks for that, David. Do you want to post that QR code or a link to it in the chat? Not sure if you've got that functionality, just in case someone wants to grab it in the future.
Yeah, I'll do it once Chris takes over here, so
yeah,
I don't lose my screen.
No problem. Is there any questions for David? I've got a list of them, but if anyone else wants to start it off.
Yeah, Dominic Mark here. David, when you've done this, have you done much work with disc seeders rather than the tine seeders? Because we're just seeing I personally seeing a swing towards disc seeders because of just the ability to handle stubble loads, and we tend in Southern Australia to go back to the old traditional, 7.5 inch row spacing to combat our ryegrass problems. And we're a strip till system, so we've got big stubbles, and tines just don't work in our system anymore.
Yeah, look, certainly had some good feedback in that regard. I suppose the reason we've been focused on the tine basis is purely for the moisture seeking aspect of it. As you'd be aware, with a disc seeder, they're probably limited to maybe 50 or 75 mil seed depth for how far we can sort of chase that moisture. And I think, yes, it's probably pretty applicable to our mainstream crops, our canola and cereals. But I think we were initially sort of looking at maybe the long coleoptile crops, such as the new varieties of wheats, the chickpeas, etc., where we can really chase that moisture sort of 6 or 8 inches if we sort of needed to. So, and we weren't really aware of a feasible sort of disc machine that could really do that. I think if we so at the moment, the row unit we've built, we can swap out the shank and put a double disc machine in there. We've got a pin in the middle there that we can pull out that shank and replace it with a disc machine. with a double disc. It just means we need to put the moisture sensor time somewhere else within the array. So yes, that's how we would combat that.
And that's probably the subtle differences or the nuances between New South Wales or the eastern states versus southern Australia, is that you guys seek for moisture. You go planting on timing, whereas we in southern Australia, we probably wait until there is moisture, or we just go dry sowing and hope for the best, which we have in the last 3 years anyway. This is the first year in probably 3 years that I've seen that we've actually got moisture in our profile. And, you know, it's only an inch down and, yeah, you'll hit it. Whereas what I see in the eastern states, Queensland, you chasing moisture and you go up to quite significant depths just chasing that moisture.
Yeah, obviously that's limited to the coleoptile of the seed.
Yes.
So we can't sort of chase this into China. But furthermore, we don't want to be chasing this any more than we need to. So we start running out of horses in our tractor at some sort of depth there. So we don't want to be going any harder than what we want. So yeah, correct. Great feedback. And we certainly are aware of that. But also from my experience or conversations with you guys in sort of South Australia, where you go from like almost a heavy to a heavy black sort of soil through to a sandy sort of ridge, where feasibly the seeding parameters may want to be different in each of those circumstances. And I'm certainly aware of places in Western Australia where they seem to have bands of stripes through the field of just a variable sort of soil type as well. So yeah, there's sort of opportunities for what could be done with how we sort of want to run this in your operation, I suppose. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
Oh, yeah, no, most definitely. Yes.
Like I said at the beginning, silence is approval. So any other questions for David?
I've probably got another one. Have you gone with uptake with the OEMs? How's some of these Australian manufacturers, because there is some pretty good manufacturers coming out of WA, and you've got a few on the East Coast now. How have they reacted to your technology?
Yeah, look, I think there's a fair bit of interest, and we've had some very, very positive conversations. I think the trick is integrating this into a standard product is not an easy. It's not an easy sort of thing. So I think from our perspective, we're going to have to try and build some demand or interest from the end user farmer guy to help encourage them to at least build a commercial first off prototype to demonstrate it on their arrangements. But yes, a lot of interest. Also had some good conversations with some of the North American OEMs. They just don't get it. Don't understand what we're doing at all, really. I think they think it's novel, but for them, they're waiting for the snow to melt, and then they're into it. So uniformity of moisture.
They still don't think they've got a compaction problem in Western Canada. They still smash, bash, do all that stuff we did 20 years ago. They still don't think there's an issue there. But, anyway, that's the Canadians for you.
Yeah, this is where we are. But yeah, look, very positive conversations, and we're looking forward to trying to work with them to move it forward.
I've got a quasi follow-up for that. So are you noticing different areas of the country in particular that are pretty keen on this type of technology, just due to their sort of climate and the variability in the rainfall that's really sort of grabbing a need for it?
Yeah, look, probably like a bit like the previous question, I suppose, Dom, is that it's easy to think that agriculture has a fixed instruction manual that everyone does the same thing the same way. But I think what I've found as we've taken some of these prototypes around the countryside that it seems to be an opportunity to resolve other issues in different ways. Certainly some of the feedback that we took one down to Pasqueville a few years ago, and they just like the idea of being able to change the press wheel pressure based off, the heavy or the light sort of soil. The guys in Western Australia want, other sort of things. So it's fascinating. I think I think everyone has had a different opinion on or reasoning why this is of interest to them. And it's each sort of resolving a slightly varied issue at their own location as far as soil or climate or various other things. So, yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. No, it's a really, we've talked about this many times. So it's a really interesting product that, you're creating, and definitely a big contributor to the Grain Automate project that you've grabbed some of the funding from. So, Is there any final questions for David, or we'll kick it off with Chris? All right. Thanks for that, David.
Thanks,
really
guys.
appreciate it. And I'm sure I'll talk to you many times in the future about the product, and hopefully one of the OEMs end up buying it and adding it to seeders on the market as, going into the future.
Thanks, Tom.
So I'll just do a quick introduction for Chris. Chris joins us from Pinion Advisory from the Commodity Risk Management team, and develops client-focused independent risk management services. These services assist clients to understand individual business risk profile in commodity markets that they operate under. Chris provides his clients with strategies and the confidence to manage volatile commodity markets. Chris has supported the grain industry as a nominated GTA arbiter and has adjudicated many disputes. He's also facilitated training in grain industry trade rules. So me and Chris have spoken, a couple of times in the last 2 weeks. It's definitely a timely subject, and I'll hand it over to you, Chris, to do your presentation. You're muted, Chris.
Thank you. I was joking about that before. Thank you for the opportunity to have a bit of a chat. We are in a situation today that remains highly volatile and very fluid. So, look, we'll follow the bouncing ball. If anyone's got any questions, I'm more than happy to field them in, as we sort of bounce that through, and how we go about managing, particularly commodity risk in this current environment. It's I'm just going to swap my screens around here a little bit just so that I'm looking at the right one. So it's a challenge in which we're dealing with in a market that's highly volatile and highly fluid. So if you think you know what's going to happen today, as far as commodity pricing and commodity markets are concerned, there's a fair chance you're going to be wrong. So it's sort of why would you set yourself up for that sort of failure? The only thing we can accurately predict today is continued volatility. And so the need to focus on what you can manage rather than an opinion on the market is absolutely critical. Supply risk versus price is one of the things, and one of the things I'm certainly focusing on is the pressure around fertilizer and then fuel, and then what does that potentially do to commodity prices down the track. So that's some of the things that I wanted to cover off. If anyone's got a question, throw them up, and if I miss it, Dominic can just ask it as we go along. So where we're currently at right now is essentially supply chains are fractured. And I'm using stronger words than I would normally use. They are fractured. It will take a reasonable amount of time for supply chains, for just-in-time supply chains to actually reform, but we need to have the Middle East sort of calming down, and that's really not something that I'm seeing today. Added to that, you've got uncertainty remaining to the actual Persian Gulf assets. the assets around LNG and crude and refining capacity within the Persian Gulf. Probably not the best place to be right now. So what is those assets remain, and does that change over time, given that we've still got a lot of discussion at a global level around the Strait of Hormuz, and the impact on that at a global economy as that flows through. Any recovery we have today is just not going to happen tomorrow. If you think this thing's going to fix itself anytime soon, we've got. I think you'll be challenged with how that carries through. Last 48 hours, we've had a ceasefire. So I'm constantly now updating charts and looking at what's happening. So what does a ceasefire mean is twofold. I'm clearly staying away from any opinion on politics. I'm not here to talk about politics because I'm not a politician. But a ceasefire, first and foremost, it may give us the capacity to release vessels stranded on the Persian Gulf side of the Hormuz Strait. However, I suspect that's actually already starting to fall apart this afternoon. So there's somewhere between 110 and 120 very large crude vessels on the Persian Gulf side, and there's Suezmax vessels as well. And there's also another 80-odd vessels that are looking at refined product within the Persian Gulf. We have, in theory, 150 to 200 million litres of crude that could transit the Persian Gulf without any addition to, with a cease of military activity. That is the theory. A lot of people actually don't understand what's actually sitting there because the ships have got all their ship trackers and their visibility turned off, and you don't know what's loaded, you don't know what's unloaded, and you don't know what's part loaded. And then there is also going to be congestion around Karg Island, which is the Irani facility, plus all the other facilities on the other side of the Persian Gulf. If you do look at Ship Tracker at the moment, there is a decided weighting of shipping in the Persian Gulf to the non-hostile side of the equation. And so knowing exactly what's actually happening within the Persian Gulf is absolutely very difficult right now. So if I look at just a volume of oil that's sitting there, you're between the Suezmax and the large crude vessels, but then if you start to see, okay, what does that mean from a day one through to day 5, well, week 5 and 6? This ceasefire was effectively 2 weeks, which you'll be lucky to see too much activity happening. I would suggest already the proof of, or the day 0 to 3 is already being tested with a lot of the transiting is occurring through the Iran, past the Iran island, which is effectively a toll booth for markets. And so that's still going to create some problems in the supply chain through to us in Australia, where we, particularly with Singapore and our refining capacity in Singapore. So, crude oil pumping has all been turned off. Obviously, you don't want to pump running for some pumping. So you talk about what's ship capacity today versus then do we go and pump more crude? And apparently somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks to turn pumping capacity back on again. So nothing is going to get fixed quickly. And also the refining capacity off the other side, both inside Persian Gulf and then what's happening Singapore side of the equation. Because a lot of the Singapore refined crude comes from that Middle East area, and that's causing some challenges. We are already seeing multi-year LNG force majeure events being declared, and I suspect there's already other force majeure event now multi-year. So fertilizer for every sense of the word relies on LNG for production, we've got force majeure events happening, which basically is a cessation or a delay of contracts which is I've arbitrated on force majeure events in Australian grains industry, and I've only ever seen probably 2 events which have constituted a force majeure event in its own right. And that's interesting. One was actually the Brisbane River, when that Brisbane River flooded and took out the port terminals. So force majeure events at a global level are rare, but this tells me that this situation, if you think fertiliser is going to come down and supply is going to be, fixed, with a poof, and it's just simply not. We're going to be working, I think, in this environment for a little bit of time. That's of course assuming the ceasefire continues, which there's an opinion there. That unlikely comment isn't my opinion. Historically, ceasefires, particularly early ones, rarely last, and there's already some activity of breaking down of that ceasefire, and there isn't the transit of the vessels through the Suez, not the Suez, the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think we're going to set return to pre-war pricing for fuel and fertiliser probably for the next 6 to 18 months. I know that's not what people are looking for. But the comment in here before I have a bit of a break and answer any questions in here is, and it's an opinion here, is farmers must take a level of responsibility for sourcing business critical inputs, whether that's fuel, fertiliser, chemical. We haven't even touched on on the supply chain for agri-chemicals and that sort of thing. And I also think a lot of farmers now have actually had some supply of fuel, probably not what people were looking for. And that's come out to get the seeding happening, and that certainly will be the case. But if you're sitting here waiting for $1.80 fuel, we could be waiting a while. And I think this is a supply risk scenario, not a price risk scenario. Is there any questions on that? I'll take a quick break. I'm just whipping through that pretty quickly. I'm not sure if it's what a lot of people don't want to hear, but it's actually, unfortunately, it's the reality of it. In that. Any questions in that before I move on?
Probably follow up on the farmers taking responsibility for sourcing essentially their inputs. How do you recommend a farmer going about that? Is it, probably the question.
It's so first of all, if we take aim at the politics in Australia and go, oh yeah, we're holding 30 days worth of diesel, that's not enough. And as a farmer, we're not prepared to hold 2 weeks worth of stock, or we were trying to price pick, then we're potentially part of that problem. The solution in here is farmers need to sort of think about not the price of fuel, but essentially the available stock they have on farm. And a simple strategy in managing this is, instead of inverting, saying, oh, I'm nearly empty, I need to ring the fuel supplier up to get fuel delivered. When the tank's half full, you're empty, right? And work from the top down instead of from the bottom up. That's a simple strategy. Some people don't have the resources to actually store the fuel on farm. That's much more of a just-in-time supply chain. And we know already that there's been fuel shortages at farm gates, and there's been a lot of politics surrounding that. But at the end of the day, as farmers, I think we need to take a level of responsibility and go, well, okay, we need to actually not worry about the price and just, let's get the fuel there, and let's get the fertilizer there when we got it available. And plenty of examples where people were thinking $2.80 was dear on fuel. I'm talking $2.80 a litre, and then suddenly we're at, I just had a quick look before I jumped on here. We're anywhere between $3.20. I didn't look in WA, but with $3.20 New South Wales, sort of $3.40, $3.50, and everything that the government gave us in a rebate of 25 cents is now back to where we were a week ago as far as price is concerned. And I still think we've got significant supply challenges going forward. Does that answer that question about, it's just a simple strategy, keep your tanks. And anybody who says that's hoarding, I don't know, they can take their opinion. We need to have critical stock management. There's people talking about, we won't sow a crop this year because of all the risks. I think that's been, and I know Mark was saying earlier on, we've had some moisture here, and that would be a potential waste of an opportunity. we can't get too far down the track either, I might add. As far as, this might impact on August and September, but if we can't get it in the ground, we're not going to harvest it. And that's a significant cost of business to adopt that attitude in early April. There's a question there as well.
You're muted, Ryan, if you're trying to talk.
Yeah. Thanks, Dom. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Just interested in your opinion. How much stock do you think a farmer should hold? Should we be holding enough to do a full season? How long's that piece of string in your opinion?
I think what we used to hold as critical input stock on fuel, 6 weeks ago, is now different to what we hold going forward, and it depends on how big a fuel scare that is and how big a resourcing. It's not a cheap exercise to go and get more capacity to store, and probably 6 weeks into the war is not the best time to be talking about that. I'm dodging the question in some regards because it's a personal decision, but it's not unrealistic for us to be going, to have this question. If I was to put a time frame around it and say, okay, what was our last biggest usage time? Was probably November, December through our harvest period. And we should be planning at least the seeding and then the in-crop. And so you could easily say that we should be 6 months ahead, but it depends on your ability to fund that. Ideally, we could be 12 months ahead. At the end of the day, it is our risk. It's the governments are not going to sit there and help us out. It's just not the political power for us to sort that out. So it's a long-winded way of answering the question. But I think we need to start to look at, maybe it's 6 months. And by the way, chemicals are also part of this mix. People are sort of only focusing on fert and fuel, but we've got a whole heap of other stuff that's coming at us that farmers will need to manage that risk. At the end of the day, the best way to answer that question is if you don't have it, right, what does that do from a business point of view? So, and then it is entirely up to us to manage that risk, I think. But it's not going to have the political miles that, I'm quite pragmatic with how I would go about it. Some simple solutions, but it's a difficult question to answer. Mark? Oh, did that answer that question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good enough. I kind of, just my opinion, expecting someone else to hold stocks for us, i.e. government. It's kind of like putting your beer in your mate's beer fridge, isn't it?
They're going to knock it off.
It might work, and exactly.
I think the only way to manage that, the only way to manage it is, it's the same with fert. I've always had this view on fert. The best place for fert and to manage that risk prior to seeding is in your shed. Now, if you haven't got the capacity to do that, then that becomes a strategic question for the business. Mark?
Chris. And thanks for the beer, Ryan. I've enjoyed it. There's a few assumptions in what I'm going to ask. Assuming we're going to have enough fuel to finish seeding, assuming we're going to have an average season, assuming we've got enough diesel to do harvest, our margins have just been obliterated because of fertiliser, diesel, etc. Will the market respond in taking this into account, being that we're price takers, we're not price makers in an export market? Where do we see, or where do you see, the main staples like wheat, in, the Chicago board, where the futures are? Is that being reflected at the minute? Or, what's your view going forward from, probably that November onwards in pricing?
It's hard enough to have a strong view, particularly on oilseed, because you can break that discussion down to canola, oilseed markets through to coarse grains. To answer the question effectively today, we remove geopolitical risk out of this market today, and I think the last 48 hours can probably answer that question for you. Wheat futures last night was off 18 cents per bushel. So the immediate reaction was no more political risk, which is a crock of shit, through to wheat prices fall. We remove the geopolitical risks, the market's going to return back to supply and demand, which is actually, we've got roughly 6 months worth of supply in the world. We're not short. However, we may get there. So November is a story that's to develop. And historically, when we see fuel rationing or fertilizer, challenges, that becomes a supply challenge, which then drags the market higher. But the market doesn't automatically counter and factor in today's price. So oilseeds are very strongly correlated to crude oil, and crude oil dropped 18 US a barrel yesterday. So you're asking me for a November forecast, and we can't really get the end of April, end of tomorrow. The answer to that, by the way, and this goes across all of this, if you think you have a view of the market, it's going to be wrong. And the market doesn't owe you a living. That might be controversial, but the market doesn't owe you a living. You need to be managing that. And if your margins are getting squeezed, which they are, it actually makes the decision more important, not less important, to follow through on, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
So in your view, the fundamentals of wheat, there's still a shitload of wheat out there.
Yeah.
For the next 6 to 8 months. We're not seeing any hiccups with droughts. That's the only thing that's going to probably revert the wheat the other way if we have a production risk.
Yep.
And war risk doesn't really, factor in.
It'll factor eventually, and it gets positive,
Yeah.
right? But it's not going to factor in April or May. It may factor by November, right? But that's so far out to call that, it's an impossible target. If you look at, and I've got a very diverse group of people, and everyone wants to know, the solution, X plus Y equals Z. And unfortunately right now that doesn't apply. The only thing you can do as far as commodity risk management, now I've got clients now that are failing to pick 5 or 6 different commodities. They've got fuel, fertilizer, interest rates, wheat, barley, canola, and they're all failing on every single one of them. I don't even know why you're bothering to try, to be honest. So the best way to manage that is if your margins are getting squeezed, we've actually got to take some opposing risk in the market to take that, to hedge that extra cost. But what we're actually doing is not hedging a profit margin. It's actually hedging gross margin, right? And that's a pretty unacceptable sort of environment. But at the end of the day, the further question is, are you not going to sell a crop? If you're not going to sell a crop, then this discussion's irrelevant. For everyone here, or everyone I'm dealing with, the discussion about not selling a crop is not, people aren't having those discussions. And so the rest has to be, by default, flowing through. So you've got to step up. You've got to basically manage that. And apologies if I'm blunt. I don't mean to be blunt. It's just, if it has to be, it has to be up to you to manage the outcome. It's your business. You need to manage the outcome. If you've got a view that wheat prices are going higher because, the most recent experience of war, unfortunately, we've had now, in the last 6 years, we've had 2, working experiences of trading a war. And the first one was a land grab, and this one is an energy grab. So, or an energy, I wouldn't say energy grab, it's an energy dispute, right? And they're going to treat differently in the marketplace. So you can't use the Russia-Ukraine or the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a guide to actually where you think prices are going to go. And if you've got a view, can your business afford your view? All questions I don't know the answer, Mark. That's the short answer.
Oh, I thought you did. But no, you're correct. With the Ukraine war against this war is completely different. Like the fundamentals were, it was a supply thing on Ukraine, where here it's really, they don't need a lot of wheat anymore. Or if they do, they get it in from Russia or by road. So it's not exports that we supply. So, yeah. No, you answered my question. Good discussion.
Yeah, good discussion. You could twist yourself up in knots in here. And then I've got another question.
Yeah, just from me, Chris. Stepping forward, thinking about urea or just nitrogen supply, logistically, when I start doing the math of obviously, 6 to 8 weeks for shipping to normalize, shipping networks to normalize, along with kind of, potential uplift in production, and then actual time to get. I'm based in Western Australia.
Yep.
We're probably pretty soon going to know that we won't have urea for July, I assume. Like, do you have any kind of cutoff dates in your mind for the war having to stop, or the strait having to be open before we can go, okay, count out urea for July, and then, say mid-April means no urea in July and end of April means no urea in August, kind of thing?
To answer the question first up, I think your 6 to 8 weeks is too light, to start normalising this. It's going to take longer than that, and we don't know how much LNG has been damaged asset-wise. And so if you think 6 to 8, I think I'm already starting to push back on that, going, how does, 3 to 4 or 5 months down the track? Fertiliser is about supply today. It's not about price. Now, I say that, and that's music to ears for a person who happens to be selling fertiliser, because if you have a desire, everyone believes the market's going to go higher, they will meet your expectation, right? And so the price will go higher just despite itself. But the question is largely around supply. And that's, I think, the bigger question here that is the main issue. As far as those time cutoffs, it gets back to the fact of, are you sowing or not sowing? Really, and for me, most people are sowing. On the flip side, the other solution, and Dominic, you said some solutions on fuel, which very simple solution. But maybe the other solution on fertiliser is stock on hand. If you've got stock on hand, you don't have the anxiety about not having it. So that's not necessarily the answer that you're looking for, but supply is our biggest risk today, not so much price. However, as Mark highlighted, is that it's chewing out our gross margins, and then suddenly farming was, no fun anymore. And we've got, David's gear about, that all that seeding gear, it didn't seem cheap. So, there's no sledge against David, by the way, and what he was presenting is all good stuff. It's just there's a cost of machinery that comes in on top of all of this, right? A cost of doing business. So,
yeah, I think for us, like we're sowing now and we've got X amount of stock on hand, but it's more the piece around some of the later crops of pivoting to, less nitrogen use crops like barley or legumes over putting in wheat kind of come mid-May. So yeah, that's the kind of thing for me. I'm looking for that cutoff. Right now we're working on getting kind of 0 to 10%, like best case scenario will be 10% of our forecast urea. But yeah, with what's going on, it could be 0.
It could well be. The other thing you don't know is what's mineralised nitrogen and that sort of thing. There's been a lot of agronomic talk about, I will throw out, canola, which was actually all the rage early March because, we had soil moisture, through to, no, we can't grow any canola anymore because if you're going to, flop around and jump around like this, it's actually going to do your head in. So you want to stick to your rotations would be really where I'd sit. I think canolas was either increasing or is basically unchanged. There's been a lot of big push locally for people to move to sort of legume like lentils to, because it's a cheaper crop. It uses less fertiliser. It still uses fertiliser. I'm going to scratch right on my limit of agronomic knowledge. But the reality is that advice is coming with no view of what the market is, right? And we've still got to get through a significant amount of lentils. And so, canola may still be presenting as your optimising gross margin scenario for a paddock or two. But if you're at 0 to 10% now, you've really got to assume that you're not going to get any more than 50%. 40% would be a good outcome of your fertiliser. You just got to assume the worst and be pleasantly surprised if it changes. You've just got to manage this risk, right? And it gets back to whole of farm risk. I've never seen farmers and clients, I've done a lot of travelling in the last 4 weeks where people are so stressed about the potential for this, and that's why why we're talking now. But I definitely do feel like an unconscious counsellor at the moment, as people are sort of working this stuff through. We just got to work it through, and we've got to think at the end of the day, park the politics, park your view of, US good, bad, Iran good, bad, largely irrelevant in my mind. I know it's very relevant, but at the end of the day, you've got to go, okay, how do I manage my business? What can I control and manage and work things through in my own business, rather than getting focused on all the other stuff, which is noise. So, and then you offset that risk in the market. Selling grain today would be selling forward small parcels more often, right? Don't try and pick it; you're going to get it wrong, right? So,
yeah. No, thank you. That's helpful. And a good reminder to everyone to not stress about things we can't control. That's definitely my mantra this season.
Oh, we'll still stress, don't worry. But the reality being is that we can't manage that. And so we focus on what we can manage. I've got some other stuff to go on with. We've got plenty of questions, so I'm generating those questions. So I can put charts up and everything else, but the reality being is that if I'm getting questions, we're also meeting what people's expectations are.
Can I make a comment, Chris? Mark here again. Just a comment that I think we can also view this as an opportunity to open up different supply lines rather than the traditional, because I think sometimes we do get a little bit complacent and we rely on suppliers of just in time. This is, to me, and previous to my farming career, I was involved in fertiliser. This has opened my eyes that we've got complacent and a little bit lazy as owners and operators, as farmers, that we may need to look outside that box for other supply lines. And I just see that as an opportunity. I had 2 people ring me the other day, nitrogen in containers, and get back to me with price and availability. But I said, well, bring it on. Maybe now's the time that changes from bulk shipments into containers. So, because freight out of China is quite cheap at the moment.
The other thing to watch is counterparty risk in this environment, which I haven't begun to open that can of worms.
No, I understand that bit, yes.
And what you're saying is right. We shouldn't trust the norm. And I did probably highlight that before, is that if the fertiliser, hopefully I don't mean to offend anybody who's a fertiliser rep, but if a fertiliser rep is sitting there, or a fertiliser company sitting there, and your expectation the price is going to go up, guess what? They'll meet your expectation, right? Yep. It's the same with fuel. If your expectation is fuel's going to go higher, they're going to meet that expectation. I'm concerned about fuel rationing. I think that's another thing, which is another topic I was going to talk about, but I'm sort of in Dom's hands as to how we if we open up that can of worms. But you're right. It gets back. I think I've got to look at that. Ryan, I think your question was around how long should we be holding stock? Well, if it's a key business risk, we should be talking about our chemical costs for the chemicals that we actually know that we're actually likely to use in crop, because there's going to be a supply shortage on chemical, right? And we need to manage that risk. Again, supply is going to be the issue, and when you scratch the surface here, you're going to start finding building costs, pipeline, anything petrochemical and energy based is going to have an increase in freight or an increase in cost, and we're looking at potential for freight, just road freight moving 20-30% higher. We're going to get squeezed on every angle with this thing, and that's not what people want to hear. But I'd rather have a conversation about how we manage it rather than the nicety. That's why I'm not talking about the politics. It's a pointless exercise. I can't manage that.
I might jump in. I've got many questions as well, but yeah.
You noticed I've stopped sharing now because it's fine. Let's just open the can of worms up. Talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you want to continue the slides, because I knew you had a couple of graphs and tables on there, because it might spark some thoughts for people in future, and then we can go back to questions again.
Sorry, wrong one. Just bear with me.
And I've got a quasi follow-up for Laura, like I just said, we'll start your presentation. I know there's a plant that's been created in Karratha, I believe, in WA, that's going to start producing urea early next year or mid next year. Do you reckon, if let's assume that this is going to continue and it's going long, that's going to have a sort of there'll be less risk in the market that we won't have availability of fertilizer in a year and a half, 2 years once that production becomes online?
I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy, right? And I think this is a human nature comment, not just farmers. If this thing was to finish tomorrow, well, the market had a very rapid response. Share markets rallied, 4 or 5%, oil prices collapsed. The market moves on really, really quickly. The strategy underpinning that will get tested 2 years out when someone walks in the door and says, "Oh, yeah, I can get this cheaper for you." All right. And so all of that stuff is discussion that's okay, but it's not going to fix our problem today. And then I fear that we don't learn from the lesson. The politics underpinning it doesn't actually want to learn. I said I wasn't going to get into the politics, but it doesn't want to learn, right? And to be honest, I think they'll go, yeah, if we kick the can down the road, the political cycle is only ever 1.5 to 3 years at best. And so they'll kick the can down the road from a political point of view, no matter which side of politics you are, until people forget. So I think it's a good idea now, but does it fix our problem today? No. So I'm really about trying to fix problems today. And if that is an outcome of that, and we actually start to address this and start to look at this seriously, then the long term is something for 5 years down the track. So
I'm aware of time. I'm pretty sure you said you would be happy to go a little bit over, Chris. So still the case.
I'm happy to go over. I'm just as people who know me, it's shutting me up is the problem. I think the discussion is good, but as long as I'm adding value, I'm more than happy to keep talking.
If you want to, go back to the presentation, and we can grab some beers. I think Ryan gave some to Mark, so he might be able to share them out for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. They're tasting better every minute.
Yeah, sorry. Fuel rationing. So this is the next level. We're at stage 2 fuel level at the moment. Price is actually the lever being pulled to manage and limit use. If we go to stage 3 fuel rationing, which there is a lot of talk in general media, what does that look like? So I spent a bit of time having a bit of a look at that. In that scenario, you as farmers can't hook up the fuel cart and go down to the local Ampol, whatever servo you can, and fill it up, which is what's been occurring today, right? People have just been filling it up out of the servo because that's the best place they can get their supply, right? So a dollar cap limit, whether they put $50 or $100 on that, it hasn't been implemented too many times. What I'm saying is if this comes in, this becomes completely unworkable from a farmer's point of view, who wants to go and get 2,000 litres in the fuel cart, or 1,000 litres in the fuel cart, or heaven forbid 3 or 4 shuttles all filled up. I've seen photos of all sorts of shit, but so fuel rationing is certainly something that is something as a risk going forward. It's being talked about. It's not politically it's not politically palatable, but that, and there's a risk in here from a business's point of view, is that agriculture is actually not deemed to have priority emergency service access. And also the car filling up to go to work is not covered under that. So, this starts to really grind the economy to a halt. It's pretty black hatty sort of stuff. But basically, agriculture and mining is managed not through retail rationing, right? It's not into the ration scenario. And that informal rationing has already occurred, right? When it's been used in the past, Gulf Wars, particularly World War II, all it did was increase a black market of fuel rationing. If we ever get to that, and I think the yardstick is when we get down to sort of 15 days worth of stock. One of the things that I'm really critical on is the lack of decent information to make a decision, a considered decision at a farm gate level, right? We've got, you look at the national recommendation, and it's still the 31st of March. We've got 30 days of fuel as of the 31st of March, which is a complete and utter useless piece of information. So we really need real-time inventory. And then how does that get fragmented out? And the coordination is incredibly difficult if we go down a fuel rationing line, which is what's been talked about. There's just some comments in there about fuel rationing. I thought I'd put that in just at the last minute to sort of highlight that it's not. If we get to that point in agriculture, I think we've got some real challenges getting people around and getting fuel out on farm gates, right? And the lobbyists will go and spend their time and as they need to try and free that up. If I look at wheat, and I've just been updating the charts already, and this gets back to what Mark was looking at. We've actually seen an upwards trend in wheat, Chicago Board of Trade wheat prices for a little bit. The correlation between Chicago and our cash wheat prices are, it's not as good as it probably was 5 years ago, but we have seen the market tail off today below, this sort of sideways movement. So that's actually, it's counter-cyclical to what Mark was saying about, okay, we've got all this other problem, we should be, compensated on the other side. So that's just not there. Crude markets have actually come off. And we've sort of seen 110. It depends on which crude market you're following. The Singapore crude tends to be a geographic marketplace. We are more aligned to Singapore because of their geography, whereas the US markets tend to be based around the other market. And you can see the impact that this is having, as it sort of runs through. Gasoline, unfortunately, in Australia, we're very heavily reliant on diesel, a fact that is probably lost on some of the people in policy. Rapeseed, again, we've seen this drop here off, and only in the last day where, canola prices have actually started to fall, but that's in line with crude. So again, this thing's all over the place. Container freight is starting to creep up, and we'll see that lag, and that'll creep up. And then the bulk rate is now starting to tick up. But you look at where it has hardly moved at this stage, but that's something that we're going to see, I think, going forward. And when I look at the charts, and when you look at, say, and GPSA did a whole exercise the other week. And this is what does give you that confidence that, wheat tails up and it's a lagging indicator. So if we see crude going higher and then wheat prices go up, this is from GPSA and from episode 3. So my strategies is really around focusing on what you can manage, using reliable data to assist with any decision making and trying to remove the politics out of the decision process. Making a decision is always better than not making a decision, but then reviewing that on the way through. That last one is more of a comment on human nature than anything else, right? And I've got some other, comments in here, around, weather, demand, and that if we get access through the Strait of Hormuz, the market will go back to a supply and demand, which is not positive today. Now, it may be in November, but it's not today. I don't know. That's probably where I want to be as far as that whole thing. If you look at the and the other one, which was just very quickly, this is about another interesting chart where we've actually got global wheat production stocks, and so production's been sort of fairly neutral on wheat, but our stocks to use ratio has actually been in decline. We're very susceptible to a supply-driven shock in the market, which could be a result of this. So, Mark, you could be right in November. I'm just not prepared to call it in April. You'll ring me up and tell me, won't you, Mark?
No, it's always good to hear other people's opinions, and yeah.
Yeah, right. Questions,
So-
Dominic? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, just wondering, when do you reckon you would be comfortable to sort of call that? What month do you reckon? Might be
What
a loaded
month?
question. Yeah,
that
what month this
November?
year do you reckon? And
I'll call-
any month before November, when do you reckon you'll be confident in the pricing actually going up for wheat, barley, etc.?
So just remember that a farmer always wants a market to go higher. So farmers are very guilty of actually talking their own book. I haven't technically answered the question, Dominic, and I know that I've dodged it. But the reality being is that if you get 10 people in the pub all going, yep, market's going higher, and someone who's maybe a little bit more rational in that discussion, because that discussion gets more interesting the later in the night, the more beers that get consumed. If I was to challenge that, people will only listen to the 10 people and the reasons why it's going higher. They won't actually listen to the one that's going, well, it's actually today, the evidence is it's probably sideways and lower. When do I get comfortable? I think it's almost, a week, maybe 2 weeks before we start to get into that side of the equation. I'm not, I'm just not comfortable today to have a view that far out. And in fact, the only advice I would say in this area is if you're dealing with somebody that has a strong view as to where this is going, you should run like hell and stop drinking the beer that they're giving you, because it's not free. It's you just got to understand that if anyone says this is where it's going, they got no frigging idea about what they're talking about. And that's a challenge, because I think it takes. I've been around for a little while, so I'm actually more than happy to stand in front of people and say, I actually don't know. People are surprised and go, well, geez, you've spent a few years in this sandpit, you should know. And the reality is that, the uncertainty that we have right now is different to anything we've seen in the past. Now, fundamentally, am I a seller of wheat today? Probably not. Maybe I am bullish a little bit, but the reality being is I don't actually have the time to actually have that view, or not so much the time. I don't have if we're managing a scenario where we've got reducing gross margins, that's the bit we have to manage. So identifying the risk is the important thing. If the market goes up, I'm happy with that, because they effectively sell less more often means we average higher. And the first sale is the most difficult sale. Forward, or people sitting on old seasons, then they go, oh shit, what if it, right? And they just become stress cadets. For what it's worth, this is what happens to stress cadets, right? Your hair stands on end, right? Or you just lose it. So, that's I didn't answer your question, Dominic, because actually no one can, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. That's the challenge that we all have in this environment, not to have too firm a view as to where it goes. If everyone jumps out of, canola and wheat, for example, wheat being a lower gross margin, going with a safe commodity like barley, no problem. Or they go into lentils. What does that do to the lentil market? The lentil market is a very different market, and they don't think forward. Like a forward vision on lentils is let's say 6 to 8 weeks tops, right? They're not looking that far out, and so suddenly we end up with 2.5 million tons of red lentils between Canada and Australia, and we've got a marketplace that just can't handle that volume in a short period of time. So, everything has a ripple effect. So,
any other questions from the audience?
I reckon David's topic was much more exciting.
I reckon you've broken a couple of people, honestly, but that's all right.
I reckon we should have had Chris first and finished off with David, because that was positive.
Look, I don't mean to be overtly negative.
No.
I'm a realist.
Well, that's what we need to hear, Chris. Sometimes we need to hear it from somebody else that, when I look at the risk, I've got a full one side of my brain is full of risk now. There is actually no risk mitigation tools I can put in place, because they're all out of our control right now. Every
There's
one
no
of them.
levers we can pull.
there's nothing we can pull. So we just got to go along for this glorious ride for the next 6 to 8 months, I think, and see what pans out.
Is there anything you can think of that a farmer can put in place for risk mitigation? So increasing their storage capacity, or because we did talk about crop rotations a bit, and you're recommending not changing them. But anything you can think of?
It comes down to what is the risk that we're trying to manage. So if you can identify the risk that you're trying to manage, the strategy that falls out of that becomes a lot simpler, right? Storing grain, that's the solution. Well, is it? How do you manage that from a cash flow point of view? What business are we trying to manage? Business risk, or are we trying to manage market risk, which is our key driver? And so, if it's actually managing business risk, which what Mark was highlighting is business risk because of the squeezing of gross margins or squeezing a margin, then that's the risk we have to manage, right?
Yeah.
And the lever that we can pull on that one, to be honest, is actually we can sell forward or we can sell old season grain, right? We don't want to fall in love with this shit. We need the cash flow to generate, to pay for, the business and the other stuff. And so that's, just by the most dangerous strategy I think you could implement today would be an all or nothing strategy. In other words, a lot of people just get on the seeders. I want to be on the seeder because that's what I love doing. I'm a farmer. I want to go seeding and I want to go harvesting, right? And that's all good, right? But it also gives me that time I don't have to think about this markets and risk. There is actually, you can forward sell wheat today. If I forward sell wheat, can I forward sell a commodity? What I'm doing by default is I'm taking currency risk. I'm actually taking price risk, and all that there is a lever that you can pull, right? But our levers that we can pull are pretty small. I don't want to go and trade. I don't trade. I don't want to go and use Chicago, for example, as a hedge today because the correlation between CBOT December wheat prices and our cash wheat prices is not as strong as it was 5 years ago, right? And the other fact is that we've got some derivatives compliance challenges and an industry that doesn't understand how derivatives work, or they want to make money out of that. If you are trying to use a derivative product to make money, you're pretty much going to lose money, cannon fodder into the market. So what is it you're trying to achieve? And then the strategy comes out from that. Our role is to, as Mark said, is to provide that counterbalance, but at the same time doing it without punching people in the nose, which I apologise if I have, but the reality is that's actually happened in the Middle East, and we just need to we need to manage the fallout. So yeah, it is exciting times, but I'm not sure if we all want that level of excitement. It also builds character. These sort of markets, they really build character. I'm not sure if we need that any more character than what we've got. So.
All right. If there's no final questions for Chris, might wrap things up. No, we've done a little bit of overtime already, so yeah,
happy
definitely
to have feedback. By the way, any feedback through to the SPA team, and feedback from myself as well, and David, I'm sure. But
I'm sure we'll have you both on board again at some point in the future because it's definitely of interest, and thank you both again for making the time for today, and thank the rest of you for coming to the Farmers Yarn Live on Air session. So for next month's Farmers Yarn, we're going to be featuring Royce Pitchford, who's also from Pinion Advisory. Royce is currently working with SPA on some Grain Automate projects for financial business modules and related case studies. So he'll be talking mainly about farm business and strategic planning during next month's Farmers Yarn Live on Air session. But yeah, till then, have a great month, and for the farmers in the coal, enjoy seeding. So thanks David, thanks Chris, and yeah, thank you all for coming on board.
Cool. Thanks for the discussion. Been good.
Thank you.